Hi there. My name is Ruth Miller, and I come to you today to explore some possibilities and some understandings. And I'm here because I'm kind of a bridge. I've been trained as a scientist for years and years and years. I worked in colleges and universities. And then I began to work with consciousness and the wisdom teachings of ancient times. So I get to bridge that space between our deep inner knowing and the wisdom teachings of the ancients and our modern science and peer review, scientific method and such. So we're going to talk about the global pandemic. And I know it's less in the media today, but it's certainly not less in our lives. I know many of the counties that have opened up across the nation are experiencing significant increases in the number of people infected. What is it? Is it a real virus? Yes, it's a real virus. It is not a hoax. There is, in fact, a new strain of virus floating around in the world, causing a lot of damage and scaring a lot of people. It happens to be the most recent mutation of a virus that is related to the SARS and the MERS viruses that we've seen in the past. SARS, the name of the virus is Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2, SARS-CoV-2. And it's called corona because in the electron micrographs, you can't see it with a microscope, you have to look at electron microscope, it looks like it has a crown around the edges. I'll show you a picture in a minute. But the name of the disease is another acronym. It's corona, virus, the disease of 2019, COVID-19. So how does this thing work? This is the model derived from those electron microscope photographs I told you about. And you can see how the little things around it seem to make it look like it has a crown. And those little pink spikes are what make this particular virus unusual. In general, a virus is a sac, a protein sac filled with DNA or RNA or a mix of the two. And the chemicals on the surface, in this case, those little pink things, determine what receptors the cell will accept it on. So the receptor has billions and billions, so the cell has billions and billions of these receptors, and they're all designed to take different chemicals. And this particular cell, this virus, not the cell, the virus has mutated in such a way that it is accepted by a particular receptor on our human cell. And then once it's accepted, I'll show you in the next slide, it goes inside the cell, and then that RNA, DNA in the middle breaks through that protein shell and converts everything in the cell into a viral making machine, a virus making machine. So now the cell is creating more and more viruses instead of doing the job it's supposed to do. This particular virus lands on something called the ACE2 receptor. I'm not going to explain the jargon there, but what ACE2 has been associated with in previous studies before this one ever showed up, the boundary cells, the epithelial cells of lungs and heart and blood vessels and kidneys and liver and our intestines. When the virus gets in there, those cells can't do what they're supposed to do. So we know a lot about ACE2 because there's been a lot of research on diabetes associated with ACE2, blood pressure associated with this receptor, and cardiac arrest associated with activities on this receptor. So guess what? People with a history of those issues tend to have more ACE2 receptors. That's because cells that have activity on a particular receptor tend to replicate with more of those receptors. And so those people, the people with those more receptors of that kind, are more likely to have symptoms when they come into contact with this virus. And guess what? In America, those are our big three issues, mostly because of our diet, which has so much sugar in it, and our tendency not to exercise. Now, how does this thing spread? We know there is a virus. We know that it affects people, particularly with ACE2 receptor issues. And we also know that it spreads pretty effectively almost everywhere it is. We don't know exactly how. There's a lot of mixed data, but most of that kind of virus spreads through the little droplets of moisture that I'm putting out right now, that all of us are putting out whenever we sing, whenever we talk, especially when we cough or sneeze. You can see in the drawing, if you've coughed or sneezed, that cloud goes out. But if you're just talking, all those little droplets go out. That's why people want to wear the masks, is because they don't want to spread it if they've got it, and they don't want to inhale it if they don't have it. And part of the issue is those drops will hang around where I am right now, in front of where I am right now, and then they'll start falling back to where I'm standing for quite a while, several minutes. You've seen dust motes in the air, yeah? It's kind of like that. Now, on surfaces, it's a slightly different story. It's not a few minutes, it's hours and days. Okay, so let's look at this. I've seen some things on the internet that say copper will get rid of it. Well, let's look at this. If you put a bunch of the virus cells on a piece of copper in 1 to 4 hours, it's down to below the limit of the detector. That's not immediate. That's not stopping the virus. You can't kill it. You can stop it. You can explode it. You can stop it from functioning. Look at cardboard, though. Think about pizza boxes. You put, less on it, and it takes a lot longer to go away. It might be 2 days before it's actually not detectable anymore. And then stainless steel, all that equipment in all the restaurants and in most of our kitchens, it lasts again for 24 more or to 48 hours. So if I shut down the restaurant and don't clean it up the night before, and I come and someone else comes in the next morning, whatever I have left in that restaurant is going to be there the next morning. Or if I shut it down on Friday and open it on Monday, there'll be less, maybe none. Okay, notice there's that little confidence interval. There's several of them on this thing. That means we're not exactly sure, but it's in this range. Finally, let's look at plastic, and plastic is so complex. There's so many different kinds of plastic. It's really, not exactly possible to say what's going on there. But again, notice that there is a slower drop. And again, we're looking at days. So the interior of your car, if you get in the next morning, it's got the same viruses in it that it did have before. If you put it away on Monday or Friday and don't get into it until Monday evening, you're fine. That's Monday evening, not Monday morning, okay? So those of us who leave our cars for 3 or 4 days or have been quarantined or whatever, we're fine. But those of us who are getting in and out of cars on a daily basis, we're going to need to wipe it down unless we want to, trust that we're safe from this virus. All right. So how much does it take to get infected, given those numbers we just saw? The results aren't clear. We really don't know, partly because some people are more sensitive. They've got more of those receptors, and apparently very casual encounters can lead to transmission. Now, how do we know this? We are looking at the number of virus cells that enter the system and the amount that is needed to cause infection. We have this huge range. Remember that range I showed in that last one where we weren't sure what was going on? Well, for this, it's huge. And that's what's got people scared. So I've been looking at all kinds of sources. This is what I do. I love looking at stuff. I love research. It's part of what I do. And I've got maybe a dozen different sources, including a lot of scientific journals. And so far, the data I've collected indicates people have strong immune systems and just a little tiny contact are fine. They take it on with virtually no symptoms. Or maybe even they throw it off. Their T cells are doing the work for them. They don't have to work hard on this one. If you've got a strong immune system like that with good T cells, you're running good attitudes in your life, you've got good diet, you're keeping your body active, all those good things. And if you have repeated and intense contact, you're going to take it on. You may only have light symptoms. I remember there was early on, there was a video with a Chinese nurse in the background going, I've been coughing for 6 weeks, but she's still working. Light symptoms, okay? And you'll probably develop antibodies, but we don't know yet what that means you're going to be immune. But we do know that most folks who have a strong immune system and lots of contact with stuff get the antibodies. A weak immune system, that is someone who is in depression or anger or upset, and who has a bad diet or has a bad diet, lots of sugar, not a whole lot of protein and good green vegetables and such. If you get a weak immune system and you have any contact with the virus, probably will take it on with intense symptoms and develop antibodies as well. And this is where people get really scared. And if you have that weak immune system with any of those three issues I talked about before, blood pressure, diabetes, cardiac issues, and you get repeated intense contact, that is someone's in your family, which was the big issue in Wuhan. Everyone got it from their family members, really. And that market thing, oh, by the way, the thing in the market at Wuhan, it was what they call a super spread experience. It was not where it was sourced. The latest research says none of the animals in the market have this thing. So we really don't yet know how it got to Wuhan. We do know it came from animals, but we don't know which animals where, and that's going to be a very interesting thing to discover. We're so early on in the science of this one. All right. Is this just another flu? Yeah, no, both. Okay. First of all, it's not in that. It targets these people with those particular conditions. Those are the ones who are getting sick. Out of the million cases and the 300,000 deaths worldwide, oh dear, those are the people who go, most likely to go. It doesn't seem to act like normal respiratory flus, normal previous ones. And we don't know when someone's likely to get infected. Normally with the flu, you can say in this 24-hour period, if you see someone, they're going to get it, okay? We can't say that with this thing. So somewhere between 2 days after you've been infected and 14 days after you've been infected, someone you've made in contact with for some period of time might get infected. That's the kind of thing we know. And that's scary for the people in charge. The other piece is it lingers. This thing doesn't last 3 or 4 days and you're done, or 24 hours and you're done. This thing goes on for days, weeks. Remember that nurse in Wuhan coughing for 6 weeks. And sometimes we have some concerns, and there are a lot of people looking at this. There may be long-lasting effects because of the damage done to the tissue in the process of both the illness and the treatment, okay? And here's the other piece. Many, many flus go by and people don't get a fever. In this one, over 95% of those who've tested positive for this active infection get a fever. Fascinating. And in the same way, it is like other flus. It's transferred about the same way, those respiratory droplets, and it has about the same death rate, about 3% plus or minus, depending on the area, depending on the population, et cetera, which is a whole lot less than MERS was. So with Ebola, half the people who got it died. But that was for a very short outbreak, and it's far less transmissible than the flu kinds of things. MERS was at 34%. 34 out of 100 people, could not fight this thing off. Smallpox is 30%. SARS, the first version of the virus we're looking at here, is like 10 in 100, 1 in 10, 1 in 10 people. You have a choir of 60 people, you will have 6 or 8 die. Wow. Okay. COVID, and that was as of March, I'm sorry. It still hasn't changed too much. It's running in that 3-ish%, and they're hoping that it'll be 1%. Compare that to our seasonal flu, where 1 in 1,000 people are likely to not be able to fight this thing off. So why are we so afraid? Well, that's one of the reasons. It's not 1 in 1,000, it's 3 in 100. The other piece is a lot of the things that people have tried in the medical world to deal with this thing have been ineffective, and they got scared. That's how we first heard about it in the first place. The doctors in China in December are going, this thing is showing up and none of the things we normally do are working. And in fact, people seem to be getting worse with some of the treatments that normally help them. That was scary. We don't know how long someone is infectious, and with the amount of travel going on in 2019, there was no way to track or limit contact. That's turned around here now in the middle of 2020. Wow, we've been dealing with this for 6 months. Who would believe it? All right. So what happened was they used computer models to project what happened in Wuhan. They showed the leaders of the countries, and in the US alone, it looked like as many as 1 million people might die. That's too much for a government to handle. So a couple of other things are going on there, but that was really what's got people scared. I'm going to give you this model. I love this guy's work. Kerry Huang put together this little computer model where he tracked, it's a moving model, so you can go to his YouTube if you want. And he tracks from the first day that the flu season starts, October 1 generally, and then he tracks over the last 10, 15 years the pace at which the number of deaths grew. And notice that the COVID line shot up. There was 90,000 a month ago, and now it's over 100,000. I think it was 106 yesterday when I checked. So this is what flus normally do in terms of death rate. And you can see, again, why people were scared. If he projected out, the end line of this graph is the projection in all the way through to the end. This would be a year of the flu season. It's scary how much higher the COVID numbers will be. And as I said, the World Health Organization is in charge. Who is in charge of all this? And it's because there's a bunch of treaties that all the members of the UN signed saying, if this happens, the World Health Organization has the authority to do these things, okay? And they did. They said, all right, we're looking at the numbers, we're looking at how fast this is spreading, we're looking at the projections, this is a pandemic. As soon as that word is brought in, a whole lot of things fall into place, and governments are expected to do certain things. They're expected to restrict travel. They're expected to shut down a lot of federal activities and federally funded activities, and they're expected to divert the military as necessary to set up and manage emergency situations. In the US, the White House and the Congress can limit a lot of things, including the Federal Center for Disease Control and Prevention. They can't tell the states what to do. The governors in the US, because we are a federation of independent states, are the ones who can tell the people, okay, this is what we do in a state of emergency. This is how it works. In other countries, it's different. Here, it's governor by governor. And they are limited by the past legislation. So I live in Oregon, and there was an issue because our governor extended the state of emergency beyond what the original rules allowed. Well, it turns out that the High Court has said, yes, this was okay under some other legislation. And then it's the city county health officials who have to enforce it, along with the police and the sheriffs. All right, now, who can we trust and what's really happening, right? We do know we went through a lockdown. We also know that now that the lockdown restrictions have been lifted, the number of cases is going up exponentially, not only in our country, but in a number of other countries as well. So don't trust any single source of information. Everybody has an agenda, whether they're a reporter or a government agent or a marketer or even me. I don't have much of an agenda, but I do. My agenda is that you get to know what's going on. And I, like everybody else, have inadequate data. I have the best I can find and the most recent I can find. The difficulty is most of the people who are talking about this have no idea. They don't really know what a virus is. They don't really know much about how this works, and they are making assumptions and building those assumptions into what they are telling you. So no single outlet is totally reliable. We can know what's being encouraged or required only by going to the source. I have heard many journalists misrepresent what the governors are saying or what the CDC's guidelines are. I've seen them circulating in various places on the internet. If you want to know what the rule is, go to who's saying the rule. That's why I told you who's doing that, right? Now, we can see what the researchers are discovering all over the place. But most of what's out there is a little too new and hasn't been fact checked. All right. The scientific method is fascinating. The process of thinking about things and hypothesizing and testing your results, your hypothesis, and analyzing your results is great. And that's what all of us do. But until someone else takes a look at it and says, you know, you blew it here, or if you had done it that way, you wouldn't have gotten those results, then we don't know for sure whether my outcome of my application of scientific method is actually useful, much less factual. So this is going to go on for a while. I want to give you a framework for thinking about this that may be useful. First of all, here we are in the world. Okay, ignore the dotted line down the middle. That was just the year 2000. But that blue line is where I think the world is. This model was created in the 90s to help us understand how what is now the global economy and what has been true of every empire since the beginning of history. This is how we go. We use up our resources in a whole, what appears to be a nice slow way, but it's on an exponential curve. And so it's going to, hit a very quick descent. As we use up the resources, we're building things, making things, providing services, growing food, etc. But a point comes where the resources are not enough to do what we thought we were going to do. The other piece that happens is all of that production creates pollution, and we're all seeing that now in the air, in the water. And that's one of the things about the lockdown. We're seeing the extent of the pollution that we were creating just in our normal day-to-day activities. All right. For the world as a whole, excluding some countries that are way past the US, is somewhere close to the center of that graph. If we look at the next line over, the US, we have far exceeded our capacity, and we are at the peak of the pollution. So it's not too surprising that we're seeing an increase in the death rates. This is not instead of seasonal flu, not instead of all those other things that are still out there. This is in addition to. So we're seeing an increase in the world and US death rate. There's a lot of explanations for this. The wisdom teachers tell us that nature is a consciousness in process, and the earth is nature embodied, maintaining a balance of life. We're part of nature, we're part of the earth, and when we help earth maintain the balance, all is well, but when we upset the balance, we feel the effects, and that's what we have done. We have exceeded the capacity of the earth to function with. So what's happened in this moment is we've got two things going. We've got our behavior plus the cycles of time, and the cycles of time would have had a new shift in global climate happening, the magnetic poles would be shifting, all kinds of things in the normal cycles of Earth's process, and then we've added our stuff to it, and we are way off balance. So plagues are a function of that outcome. If we look at this carefully, we're going to observe it carefully. We're going to do everything we can to test our observations and get our own beliefs out of the way. We're going to, do what we can, but still there's this weird thing that happens. We all have fear and love, fear and love. When we're in fear, we see things one way. When we're in love, we see things another way, right? You know how it is. You've been in love. You know what it looks like. And you also have been in fear. That's what it's like. And I love this quote from Arthur Clarke. If a distinguished white-haired scientist tells me something is possible, I believe him. If he tells me it isn't, I discount him immediately. Because what he's telling me is that he's come to the limits of his willingness to accept new possibilities. That's not working. And from Black Elk, we have grown men can learn from very little children, for the hearts of the little children are pure. Therefore, the Great Spirit may show to them many things which older people miss. Right? So whether I'm in science or I'm in the wisdom traditions, I want to be careful, because we're all telling ourselves these stories about how the world is, and we're all going back and forth between being afraid of what might happen and being trusting in the love that is unfolding. And it's going to affect what we're seeing and doing. And this is because The human mind is going to fill in details. It's going to, just like those numbers, you remember those drawings, you used to draw the lines between the points when you were a kid. That's what the human mind does. So we get 2 or 3 points of data out there, and we go, oh, I think I see how that works. And it becomes our story, our narrative. This is, we say something like, oh, that's that way because someone made it that way. Well, that someone had every reason to make it that way. If I were someone, if I were that person making it that way, this would be my reason. That's 90% of what I hear out there about every topic, especially this one. And the narrative then takes on a life of its own. And even the person who made it up doesn't remember they made it up. And then they share it. And other people, if they accept it, run with it, and they add it to their narrative, et cetera, et cetera. If they don't accept it, then it may not go any further than the person who invented it. Hopefully. The scientific method with the peer review is a way to double check whether my narrative really explains what I'm observing, right? By my own tests and the tests of others, okay? And that happens in the wisdom traditions over time. It's all a function of belief, okay? Whether we're calculating statistics or healing a body, what we believe affects what we see and what we can do. You remember Henry Ford, if you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right, right? If fear is present, power is limited, and the control of the situation, I got to control it, oh, it's scary, I got to control it, becomes our default position. If we're feeling powerless and, oh, I can't do anything about this, we turn it over to someone else. That's how authoritarians become leaders, okay? And then we're telling our story about how it's a fearful situation. We're reinforcing that over and over again. On the other hand, if I'm in that place of gratitude, appreciation, love, that fear fades. So that's the tool there, right? If I'm in fear, go to appreciation. The body-mind begins to assume that it has the ability to cope, and it's not so likely to turn over power or to try to control the situation. It's going to go, oh, I wonder how it's unfolding. What's happening here? It's opening to new possibilities. My story about what must be happening shifts, and I get different points of view. We've all had that many, many ways. The typical one is we hear a noise in the dark, okay? The first reaction is, oh, is that a predator? And then if we run with that, that narrative, we're likely to run or grab a weapon, right? If we can go, oh, no, wait a minute, there couldn't be one of those here, and then start being open to possibilities. I tell my folks, start asking questions if you want to get out of fear. So, how to tell what's real in the world we're living in now, with this instant communication, with all these voices, all these experts and pundits and everything telling us what's happening. If the narrative is based on evidence that's been tested and corroborated by multiple sources, and it doesn't induce more fear or control, and if I accept that narrative and that doesn't make me feel fearful or induce in me the tendency to damage self or others, and the source of that narrative clearly doesn't have a political or financial agenda for sharing their narrative, then, only then, there's a great probability that what you're hearing resembles what's actually happening. And that is as good as it gets. So don't be fully trusting. My take on all of this, what we've been experiencing since December has been forecast, predicted, prophesied for decades by people in and out of Western culture. And it happened. That whole global shutdown happened without a natural disaster or major nuclear war. That's amazing. I'm fascinated by that. So again, and we got a little chart over time. We got some lines in this model. Many of you have seen this model. The world is at a place where the global culture that I've called the Democratic Republic, with all of its technological innovations, has greatly exceeded the Earth's carrying capacity, that dotted line across there. Previous cultures, the very bottom line is tribal hunting gathering. The next one is villages, the blue line. The green line are the medieval fiefdoms. We've seen a few left in the Middle East and Asia. The hunting gathering groups are doing as well as we will let them by leaving their environments. The tribal villages, the gardening villages, are fine wherever they're being allowed to live. It's the fiefdoms and the democratic republics that are falling apart because we can't maintain those systems given what we've done to the planet. The US is a little further along again than the rest of the world in this decay, but it's also further along in that new green line going up. Starting in actually 1965, but I'm going to say 2000, there were all these new technologies which we're experiencing right now, and there are new values emerging around our relationship with the earth. And this is the basis for a whole new culture that's emerging. So where we are now is we're seeing the results of the falling apart of the old systems, the plagues, the breakdown of the system, the various institutions, and we're seeing the emergence in the interconnectedness people are going through, including this video, and you're watching it. I'm going to connect with the people who are willing and able to move forward in this world with some hope. So what to believe right now? Let's accept the fact. From every single empire, plagues have always been part of it, including the plague of 526 in Rome, okay? We can trust the narratives that are corroborated and do not incite fear. If someone is saying something to you, don't listen, okay? If someone is saying, you know, I heard so-and-so say this, I go, wow, okay, let me see who else is saying that and how they're coming to those ideas, all right? Trust your own inner sense of direction. Accept and do and go what and where your inner guidance says you will feel harmony and peace. Harmony and peace. That's what it's about. And that's what I came here to say today. I hope this has been useful to you. You have a wonderful, wonderful unfolding from this time. May you live in joy and harmony and peace. Bless you, dear. Bye-bye.